This is a Rogue Media Network podcast.
Do you ever have a story that you just can't get out of your head?
One that you play the details of over and over with your friends?
Well, you've come to the right place. I'm Claire.
And I'm Susan.
And this is Justice Pending,
a weekly true crime podcast where we discuss tantalizing crimes with more questions than answers.
Imagine you're getting ready for work. You grab your coffee, your purse, and you head out the door.
Little do you know, it's the last time you'll do any of those things.
You walk into your office, and you're the first person to arrive.
You flip on the lights and start getting ready for the day. But suddenly, your normal routine is upended by an intruder.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of Justice Pending. This is definitely a case that has kept me up at night wondering what in the world really happened and is the right person in prison?
Oof.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Claire.
And I'm Susan, not to be confused with the Susan we're talking about today. So today's case, well, buckle up because this one has everything. Mystery, sketchy police work, and even a dramatic Grand Canyon jump.
Oh yeah, it's a wild one. We're talking about the murder of Susan Loper, a Pilates instructor from Texas who was abducted from her studio in 2011 and later found beaten to death.
Ugh. And the guy who got convicted, Terrence Black, he literally tried to escape by throwing himself off a cliff.
And not just any cliff, the Grand freaking Canyon.
And somehow he survived. Which, I mean, that's a commitment.
Right? But that's where things get tricky. Terrence Black is serving a life sentence. But some people believe the wrong guy is behind bars.
Including his family, who have been fighting hard to clear his name for years. And the more we dug into this, the more we realized this case is not as open and shut as prosecutors made it seem.
Yeah, I've been wondering, was justice served or did the real killer get away? I've actually looked at this thinking it could be a full season of Final Days on Earth. Like there's enough there that we could take this, for a good 8-10 episodes if we wanted to.
Wow, let's let our listeners decide. Leave us a review or comment or write a note on the website. Tell us if you want to do a deep dive.
That's a great point. Listen to this case and tell us if you think it's worthy of a full season of Final Days on Earth where we would go through every detail in this case. So this is the Susan Loper case, and let's get into it.
Okay, so let's set the scene. Susan Loper, 40 years old, Pilates instructor, single mom. It's April 19th, 2011, and she's starting her morning at the Glen Eagles Country Club in Plano, Texas.
Except she never gets to finish that morning because instead she's abducted from her studio. Her purse is torn, her coffee is spilled, and it's clear there was some kind of struggle.
Not the coffee.
Right?
But sorry, we shouldn't joke. But by the next day, they do find her car. It's abandoned. And not long after that, her body, badly beaten, is discovered in a field.
Yeah, the scene, everywhere from the studio to where her body was found, it's just so obvious that this is a violent murder. And it's just horrific.
Right. And it's a nearby field.
Right. And police don't waste any time naming 3 potential suspects. Susan's ex-husband, Craig Loper, her boyfriend at the time, Jason Hayes, and her ex-boyfriend, Terrence Black.
Okay, so Craig, he had an alibi, so that checked out. So that left Jason and Terrence. And here's where things get interesting. Both of their DNA was found in Susan's car.
Yeah, so Susan had been dating Jason Hayes, for a while, but her ex-boyfriend, Terrence Black, wasn't fully out of her life. So they both had been in her car recently. And so they had reasonable explanations for why their DNA would have been found in Susan's car. And, But instead of treating them both as strong suspects, the cops zeroed in on ex-boyfriend Terrence Black.
And you might be asking yourself why that was. Well, it's because Terrence took off after the murder. And when park rangers in Arizona found him,
That's when he went full action movie villain and launched himself off the Grand Canyon.
I mean, why did he think jumping off was the right answer?
I don't know, but I will say surviving a fall into the Grand Canyon is not exactly helping your I'm totally innocent case.
I mean, I'd have to agree with you there.
Yeah. I
So
mean,
it makes you
that's
look guilty.
yeah, it's just such a wild thing to do, and I think you can sort of picture that state of mind where you're like, I did this horrible thing. I'm about to get caught. I have no options left. I'm literally going to jump to my death. That's what it looked like.
Yes.
Um,
I mean, who
and
expects
then
to survive a jump like that, too? I mean, right. That's like a Hail Mary
right.
at that point.
Yeah, so he's rescued by park rangers and in footage of hearings after this, he's like wearing a neck brace.
Oh,
It's really just unbelievable the plot twists in this one. And that's exactly what the prosecution ran with. They painted Terrence Black as an obsessive ex who just had to have Susan, and when she didn't want him back, he snapped.
wow. Okay. So aside from the very guilty action of throwing yourself into the Grand Canyon, what evidence did they actually have?
So, first was the fact that Terrence had hacked into Susan's email the night before she disappeared.
Ooh, that sounds shady.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't look good. The idea that he was like creeping on her computer, they painted it like as stalking. Um,
Mhm.
that he had her passwords, that he was keeping track of where she was going, what she was doing, who she was communicating with. I mean, that definitely goes into the jealous ex-boyfriend storyline, right?
Oh, sure.
Um, and it would stand to reason that he would know that she had work that morning. It would be in her calendar that she was going to work at the Glen Eagles Country Club. And
Yeah.
so it sort of gives the opportunity for him to commit this murder. And then of course they had his DNA in her car.
He is not a good look.
No, and add all that to the Grand Canyon stunt, it's just really starting to add up against Terrence Black.
Yeah, none of these things are helping his case. So I can see why the prosecution is zeroing in on him.
But here's the thing, there was no physical evidence tying him to the actual crime scene where Susan was attacked.
Oh, that's right. So, okay, so then here's where things get murky because the only DNA at the studio where she was working belonged to Jason Hayes.
Right. So that was her current boyfriend. And so he had an explanation. He said that he had helped her set up for her class and that he admitted to being in the studio in the day prior to her murder, that he had gone with her, he'd help her get prepared, and there was nothing untoward about his DNA being in the studio. However, other people look at that and say, well, that's convenient, to say that that's why it's there. But that was the story, and instead of looking further into Jason, police went all in on Terrence.
Yeah, it sounds like they had their mind made up from the start. So here's what the defense argued. Jason Hayes, Susan's boyfriend that we just talked about, was actually the more likely suspect, I suppose, based on his DNA showing up at the crime scene.
Well, it's not just that. The defense argued that Jason had a documented history of domestic violence.
Ooh.
His ex-wife had even listed family abuse as the reason for their divorce.
But police never searched Jason's home, never looked at his phone, never checked his computer. They didn't put him through that same evidence gathering process that they did for Terrence.
Right. They contacted him almost immediately when Susan was found, and they felt like he was very straightforward, that he didn't act suspicious, that he sort of behaved appropriately for how they believed a, grieving intimate partner would react to the news of their loved one being murdered. And so that really just turned off their police radar. So that I don't feel like I've ever seen that happen before,
Mm.
where they just sort of take his word for it, right? And they just believe that because he acted appropriately, because he immediately answered the phone, offered to help, went and talked to police, that they just didn't treat him as a suspect. They treated him as a victim, the victim's family, and they treated him as a witness in the days leading up to Susan's death. So they gathered a lot of information from him, but they never really looked at him as a suspect. Again, that's the defense. That's the defense of Terrence Black, was that they didn't fully examine Jason as a suspect in the murder. But meanwhile, according to the defense, they illegally searched Terrence's computer. They went into his house. They said the computer was on, which, I mean, they said it was on and unlocked, and that they were able to just download everything.
Hmm.
So then they had to file a second warrant to say, that they had probable cause to look at his computer. But that was after they'd already gotten all the pertinent information that they needed. So this is kind of like the fruit of the poisonous tree. If
Yeah.
you've ever been to, a courtroom or listened to these criminal proceedings, whenever I was a producer for 48 Hours, this would come up all the time. If you get evidence illegally, you're not supposed to be able to use any of it. It's all poisoned. So
Yeah,
the
it's
fact, yeah, that they didn't
unethical.
have the right warrant, the defense argued they shouldn't be able to use any of the evidence found on Terrence's computer. But by filing this second warrant to sort of cover it up, as the defense would say, they were able to circumnavigate the whole poisonous tree and actually enter this into evidence.
Wow, that I mean, borders on illegal or is illegal, but it's certainly not ethical. That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So here's another weird thing. Terrence, whenever he um, jumped into the Grand Canyon, he actually left a note.
Ooh.
Now, Terrence's family has said it wasn't a suicide note.
Huh.
They don't characterize it that way, but most people consider it a suicide note. It didn't say, "I'm sorry for what I did." It said, "Someone killed Susan. She was amazing."
Now, okay, two things. If you're guilty, wouldn't you maybe confess in that moment when you think that's it? I'm killing myself. I'm jumping. But then also, how did how did he know what was the timing on the jump? Like, how did he know someone had killed her if he went running right after? When
Yeah, I mean, it was all over the news. This was
okay.
not, a private event. Like, this was a woman who violently is taken from, a country club in Plano, Texas, which is a suburb of Dallas, a very wealthy suburb, where a lot of people feel very safe. And so the idea that this had happened, in this public place,
Hmm.
in this well-known place, that definitely raised the media profile of this. So, I mean, it was everywhere that she, first had gone missing, and then shortly after that, that her car had been found and that her body was found. So, I mean, he fled and wrote this note, and so that really is creating a lot of evidence for police to use in the case against him.
So, and this, he was truly the only suspect. So, I imagine if you're a Pilates teacher, maybe you have some regulars, maybe people become a little too friendly or obsessed with their teachers, it
Yeah.
can happen. No one ever, the police really disregarded everyone else, including a very likely other suspect. It's so interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of reminded me of the Missy Beavers case,
Yes.
actually. You
Yes.
know, we have another fitness instructor who's killed violently,
Before
bef
class begins.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. So, it's just really, really troubling. But, here's where I land. Terrence Black is a creepy dude, no question. But is he a killer? I don't know.
Same. I think there's enough doubt that this case maybe should have been handled differently. At the very least, I think the jury should have heard more about Jason Hayes. And I think the police should have explored that option a little bit more just to concretely rule him out or
Yeah.
keep him around as another option as a suspect.
Yeah, so I mean, Terrence Black didn't have a history of violence. He didn't have a criminal record. He had come across as a very mild mannered, low key guy up until this point.
Mm.
Now, you can say that he, by hacking into her email account, was starting down this path of, inappropriate behavior and was starting to deviate from the norm. And he took it, more into this dark place. And, people snap. They commit crimes, they commit murder, even when they have no history of violence. But the fact that Jason did have a history of violence,
Yeah.
that he was specifically violent with his ex wife, and that was documented, that I feel like has to be looked at. And the judge shut it down completely. So, the judge felt like it was not appropriate for this to be discussed in court, that they had to try the case against Terrence Black, not a case against Jason Hayes, who had not been charged with the crime. And so he didn't allow the alternate suspect theory to be presented as a defense for Terrence Black.
Wow. Is that
Yeah.
is that normal? Have you seen that before? Because I can't
Yeah.
imagine you'd want, as a defense attorney, you'd want your client to be charged in a silo like that.
I absolutely have seen it before. It's actually not that uncommon, at least in Texas. So when I was working for 48 hours, I would travel to courtrooms all over the southern United States, but mostly in Texas. And it was not uncommon for judges to say, we are not going to hear any alternate suspects theories because there's one person on trial and that all the evidence has to go toward that person. And so they
Wow.
wouldn't, well, yeah, they wouldn't allow it. Now, that's a great case for appeal. You can bring that up on appeal and say that you were not allowed to present an adequate defense. And sometimes it gets reversed, on appeal. But in this case, Terrence was found guilty, sentenced to life in prison. And so far, none of his appeals have been successful.
Ugh, wow. Okay, well, I guess that means one of two things: that either the justice system got it right, or Terrence had nothing to do with this, and the real killer is still out there. Ugh.
Yeah, and that's what, Terrence Black's family is really pushing for. They've hired private investigators. They have funded his defense with multiple appellate attorneys trying to get other issues brought before the court, trying to get the surveillance video from around the Glen Eagles Country Club to be examined, trying to get lots of other evidentiary steps taken that were not taken during the trial. And that's the part that keeps me up at night. I actually drive by the Glen Eagles Country Club all the time in Plano. It's on my regular errand running route. And so I just see it and I think, gosh, I cannot believe that someone, was brutally murdered here and that there's still questions about whether or not justice was served.
Yeah, that's I guess a job hazard for you. Driving
Yeah,
by
it
all the
is.
sites
It's
in your backyard.
It's so true. Like, I can pretty much anywhere I go in the Dallas Fort Worth area, in any direction, I come across some memory of a murder case. It's like, oh, the murder suspect used to work at this bar. Oh, there's the high school that, the victim attended. And it's crazy how all these thoughts live in my head. I just, yeah, it's not normal, and it's part of the reason why I wrote Killer Story: The Truth Behind True Crime Television, my memoir that is out February 18th. And I think that as people discover this podcast and learn more about these cases, I hope that they'll check out the book because I go into detail about a lot of cases, solved, unsolved. There's no shortage of fascinating, tragic, bizarre murder cases that I've covered.
Totally. The book is amazing. Everyone should read it. It's so well told. But keep listening to this podcast because not every case could have made its way into the book.
Yeah, it ended up being like almost a 400-page book, and I had to cut
There
out
still
so much,
are.
you know?
Yeah,
So
it's wonderful.
well, thank you. Thank you.
So
So yeah.
let's see what everyone thinks. We did a very brief synopsis today about this case. But yeah, we could go digging so much deeper. The family has certainly not given up. That it's a solved crime. I'll put solved in quotes. And maybe it's something that we do want to cover, or you want to cover on Final Days on Earth for a full season. Because really the question does remain, did they convict the right person, or was this tunnel vision at its worst? So you can write a review. You can contact us on our website, justicepending.com, and let us know what you think.
Yeah, it's always great to hear from people. We get suggestions for other cases. We get tips on existing cases. Sometimes people have theories that we hadn't considered yet. They might connect us with experts. So we love to hear from listeners. Please don't hesitate to reach out. And as always, stay safe, stay curious, and stay tuned for the next episode of Justice Pending. Justice Pending is recorded in Dallas, Texas for Rebel Studios. It's hosted by me, Claire Sanamaw, and Susan Passoni. Our theme music is Bending Truth, licensed at premiumbeat.com. We appreciate all listener feedback. Leave a review wherever you're listening right now, and we might read it on the air. Thanks for joining us.